The nanny's voice cracked through the childcare center like a slammed door. "I'm done with these girls." The words hit the glass walls so hard that even Mark Turner, pushing his cleaning cart past the entrance, stopped mid-stride. Inside, two little girls sat pressed against the far-cornered twin statues in rumpled dresses, eyes blank as frosted glass. For a moment, no one moved. Not the nanny, not the children, not even Mark. The nanny stormed toward the exit, muttering into her phone about quitting and never coming back. Her anger seemed to leave a scorch mark in the air, but the twins didn't flinch. They didn't blink. They simply existed in a silence so heavy, it felt alive. Mark had seen silence like that before. It had lived in his home for half a year, curled inside his son's small body, like a winter that refused to thaw. That memory tightened in his chest as he watched the girls shrink into the corner, as if trying to disappear between the seams of the room. He should have kept walking. He was just the night shift janitor of the Mercer Media headquarters in downtown Seattle, another invisible man in a building full of powerful people. But something in that silence called out to him. Not a cry, but a quiet echo he recognized. The twins couldn't have been older than 7, and yet their faces carried a practiced emptiness, the kind born from fear rather than shyness. He found himself standing at the door, his hand hovering over the handle, wondering why his feet refused to move. Inside the room, one of the girls shifted imperceptibly, a tiny twitch of her fingers, as the nanny disappeared down the hallway. Mark knew that movement. He had seen it on the nights when Ethan would curl into himself, unable to face the noise of a world that had become too sharp. He remembered kneeling on his apartment floor, whispering into the void, where his son's laughter used to live, begging for any sign that Ethan could still hear him, even if only with his heart. That plea had gone unanswered for months. Maybe that was why Mark pushed the door open now. Maybe that was why his pulse thudded like a drum against his ribs as he stepped inside. The twins turned their heads toward him in perfect unison, their gaze wary but attentive. They looked at him the way prey looks at a shadow crossing the ground, expecting harm bracing for it. He stopped several feet away, lifting his hands slightly as though approaching a wounded animal. "Hey," he said quietly. His voice barely rose above the hum of the air vents. "My name's Mark. I clean the building at night." The twins didn't answer. They didn't need to. Their eyes followed him, measuring the edges of his presence, deciding if he was threat or ghost. Mark didn't step closer. He didn't crouch or reach out or speak again right away. Instead, he lowered himself slowly to the floor, choosing the opposite corner of the room like a man settling into a patient vigil. The carpet felt stiff beneath him, the air cold against his skin. But he stayed still, breathing softly, not staring at the girls, not demanding a thing. Minutes stretched like thin glass. A lesser man would have filled the silence with nervous chatter, but Mark simply sat the way he had learned to sit beside Ethan on the nights when words were useless. He let the quiet settle until it felt less like a threat and more like a blanket that both sides could share. Only then did he rise with deliberate calm nod once toward the twins and head back to the door. He had almost crossed the threshold when he heard it, a single exhale, small and trembling like someone letting go of a breath they had held for too long. It wasn't much. It wasn't even a sound most people would notice. But Mark noticed, because once that tiny breath had been the first sign that his son was finding his way back. He stepped into the hall with a strange heaviness pressing on him, not dread but the weight of a choice settling into place. He still had entire floors to clean before dawn. Yet all he could think about was the stillness in those two children's eyes and the whispered echo of his own past folded inside theirs. Tomorrow he realized he wouldn't walk past this room. wouldn't come empty-handed. Night settled over West Seattle like a slow falling curtain when Mark Turner slipped into his small apartment, the weight of the day still clinging to him like damp air. The place was quiet, as it always was at this hour, quiet enough that the soft scrape of his keys on the counter sounded louder than it should. He shrugged off his jacket, rubbing his sternum, as though he could knead loose the invisible knot forming there ever since he saw the twin girls. A faint shuffle came from the hallway, then the soft pad of bare feet. Ethan appeared in the doorway in dinosaur pajamas, hair tousled, his eyes reflecting the lamplight like small moons. He was 8 now, taller, but still carrying the fragility of a child who had once been shattered. Ethan raised his hands, signing the question with gentle strokes. Couldn't sleep? Mark gave a tired smile. Rough day, the boy hesitated, and then stepped closer, climbing onto the stool beside the old wooden workbench. It was the only corner of the apartment that felt alive, covered in curls of sanded maple, half-finished carvings and tools arranged with precision. Here was where Mark always returned, when the world felt too heavy a place, where wood yielded, where something broken could be shaped into something worth holding. Ethan's gaze drifted to the block of maple in his father's hands. "What's that?" Mark hesitated, then lifted the carving. It was the early outline of a fish, simple and unfinished. He had carved one just like it years ago. For Ethan. During the dark months after the accident. "It's for 2 little girls," he said softly, speaking, even though his son would read the movement of his lips. "They remind me of you. The way you used to sit so still. The way you disappeared inside yourself." Ethan frowned, then signed slowly. "They scared very." Mark's voice caught on the single word. He wasn't sure if it belonged to the twins or to the memory of his own child unraveling into silence. "I don't know what happened to them, but they look like they're carrying something too heavy for kids that small." A beat of stillness passed, then Ethan tapped his own chest. "My fish helped me." Mark swallowed hard. He remembered every moment of those months, Claire's empty seat in the car, the echo of twisted metal, the sight of his son lying on a hospital bed, with bandages covering half his head. The day he learned Ethan would never hear again. The day the boy stopped speaking altogether. The guilt had taken root fast and deep. He'd been talking to Claire when the accident happened. A stupid argument over groceries. He had been the distraction, and distraction had cost a life. He left nursing after that. He couldn't bear watching families crumble, knowing he was already carrying a rubble pile of his own. Becoming a janitor in a massive corporate building was easier. No patience, no pressure, no risk of breaking anyone else. Ethan reached out, fingers brushing the unfinished carving. "You should give it to them tomorrow." Mark exhaled. The boy always saw deeper than most adults. "That's the plan," he murmured, his voice roughened by the memory he rarely allowed himself to revisit. He picked up his carving knife. Wood shavings began to fall, catching on his forearms like curled snowflakes. The rhythm steadied him. Each stroke brought the fish closer to something smooth, something gentle, something a frightened child could hold without getting hurt. Ethan watched silently, chin propped on his hands. His father's movements reflected in his steady eyes the same way they had years ago when Mark carved to comfort a little boy who had forgotten how to trust the world. After a long moment, Ethan signed again. "You helped me come back." Mark froze. It was not a statement he expected. It hit him like a soft blow straight to the heart. He reached out, cupping the boy's face gently. "No," he whispered. "You fought your way back. I just stayed close enough for you to find me." Ethan nodded, solemn as an old soul, and then settled beside him, leaning lightly against his shoulder. Together they worked, one carving one, watching both remembering the weight of silence and the long, hard climb back toward light. By the time the moon hung full over the apartment roofs, the maple fish gleamed smooth and warm in Mark's palm. He closed his fingers around it, feeling the story it carried. Tomorrow, he thought, those girls will have something to hold on to. Something that says, someone noticed. Someone stayed. And for the first time in a long while, Mark felt a quiet shift inside his chest, a whisper of purpose returning shaped from the same pain that had once nearly undone him. Morning came gray and low over Seattle, the kind of sky that felt heavy enough to tip over. Mark Turner stepped into the Mercer Media Building with the wooden fish tucked safely in his pocket, its smooth shape pressing against his leg like a quiet reminder of why he had returned. The lobby buzzed with executives rushing toward elevators, phones glued to their ears, heels clicking like impatient metronomes. No one looked twice at the janitor pushing a cleaning cart. No one ever did. But today, invisibility felt like an advantage. He slipped into the child care center with a practiced nod to the new nanny, a tired woman who barely acknowledged his presence before dropping into a chair and scrolling her phone. The fluorescent lights hummed above sharp and cold, but the room itself felt muted, as if holding its breath. Lily and Hazel Mercer sat in the same corner as before, knees drawn up, eyes watchful beneath their waves of brown hair. They didn't startle when Mark entered, but their gazes sharpened, alert, wary, waiting to see what he would do. Fear had become a second skin for them, worn thin but unbroken. Mark kept his posture loose and unthreatening. "Maintenance request," he said, casually tapping the vent above their heads. It was a lie, of course, but no one questioned a man in a uniform doing his job. He set up the step ladders, slowly giving the girls time to adjust to his presence. He didn't look directly at them. He simply worked. Unhurried movements, no sudden shifts. He knew from experience that children who lived inside their own silence observed everything. Their guard rose or fell based entirely on the smallest signals. After a few minutes of pretending to tighten screws that didn't need tightening, he climbed down and walked toward his cart. His heart beat too loudly. He knew this moment mattered. Mark reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the curved lines of the carved fish. When he knelt, he made sure to stay a few feet away, close enough for connection, far enough for safety. The girl's eyes locked on the movement. Without a word, he placed the wooden fish on the floor between them. Light caught on the polished grain, highlighting the soft edges he had sanded until his fingertips ached. It was small enough for a child's hand, simple enough to feel timeless, gentle enough to say, "What words couldn't you matter? You are not alone." Mark didn't explain, didn't smile, didn't wait. He simply set the fish down, stood up, gathered his ladder, and walked out as quietly as he had come. Just before the door closed, he heard the faint rustle of movement, quick and delicate. One of the girls reaching out, fingers closing around something smooth in a world full of sharp things. The next day he returned with a bird. The day after that, a star. Then a heart, a butterfly, a moon. Each piece carved late at night in his apartment, while Ethan leaned against his shoulder, watching the wood become something gentle. Every evening, Mark entered the child care room the same way, no questions, no demands, no expectations. He would fix a vent that didn't need fixing, wipe a counter that was already clean, sit for a quiet minute against the opposite wall, then leave a small carved shape behind. Lily and Hazel pretended not to notice, but their eyes always tracked him now. Their hands clutched the previous carvings, stroking the wood, with a desperate, repetitive rhythm that told Mark everything. They weren't just holding toys. They were holding safety. By the fourth day, both girls kept their collection arranged neatly beside them, a tiny constellation of maple and hope. Their breathing changed when Mark entered, shallower at first, then slower, steadier, as though the room itself softened when he was inside. And still he asked for nothing. To push too soon, to demand too much, he knew better. Silence wasn't an enemy. It was a shield, a language. On the fifth evening, as he stood by the door preparing to leave, Mark saw something shift in their eyes, something small but unmistakable recognition. Not of his job or his uniform. Recognition of him. A man who stayed. A man who didn't push. A man who brought softness into a world that had taught them only to brace for impact. He closed the door behind him with a slow exhale, feeling the echo of that moment settle into his bones. This was working. Not because he had spoken, but because he hadn't. Seattle's dusk sank early that evening, turning the tall windows of Mercer Media into long mirrors as Mark Turner stepped into the child care center again. The room was dimmer than usual, the lamps switched to their softer settings, casting warm halos over the quiet space. But it wasn't the lighting that stopped Mark. It was the way Lily and Hazel looked at him. They were sitting upright now, not curled into each other, but watching the door as if waiting. Their hands tightened around the small carvings he had left over the past week, a mismatched chorus of wood that had somehow become their armor. Their eyes carried that same fragile alertness. But tonight something else flickered beneath it. Curiosity, cautious hope, the beginning of trust. Mark stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, grounded. He carried nothing but a single small figure in his palm, a butterfly carved from maple, its wings curved in quiet motion. He knelt, placing himself at their eye level, but still keeping a respectful distance. The twins stared, their breath uneven. He held out the butterfly, not on the floor this time, but in his hand. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then, as gentle as a trembling leaf, Lily's gaze dropped to the butterfly, her fingers twitching in the slightest echo of longing. Mark knew it was time. He lifted his free hand and signed two simple words. "For you." Hazel stiffened. Lily's lips parted. Neither girl moved, but their eyes followed every stroke of his fingers, as if memorizing the very air he touched. He signed again, slower this time. "My name is Mark. I won't hurt you. You don't have to talk." The effect was instantaneous. Hazel's breath shuddered. Lily's eyes widened, the first visible crack in that porcelain stillness they had worn like armor. The room felt electrified, charged with something delicate and astonishing, like witnessing a seed break open underground. Mark gently placed the butterfly between them and moved back, choosing his usual spot against the opposite wall. But instead of pretending to fix something or busying himself with tasks, he simply sat. He existed in their space, without noise, without pressure, without expectation. 10 slow minutes passed. The soft hum of the building filled the silence, but this time it didn't feel oppressive. It felt shared. At last, Mark stood. He raised one hand in a quiet farewell and walked toward the door. He wasn't expecting anything. He certainly wasn't prepared for what came next. A small, jerky motion. Then another. Lily's hands lifted, trembling, shaping the air with the hesitancy of someone remembering a forgotten language. "Thank you." The sign was imperfect but unmistakable. Mark froze, not visibly, but inside, where every emotion he had bottled for years suddenly surged upward. He turned slowly, making sure not to startle them. He answered with steady, deliberate hands. "You're welcome." Hazel's fingers fluttered next, uncertain, then firming into the sequence of letters. H-A-Z-E-L. Her sister followed L-I-L-Y. Their names hit him harder than any shout could have. Not just because the girls had chosen to answer him, not just because they trusted him enough to speak with their hands, but because no one else in this building had ever reached them. Mark lowered himself back onto the floor, his back touching the wall as if to anchor himself. He signed calmly, though, his heart hammered. Beautiful names. It's nice to meet you. The twins watched him closely, eyes shining with a mix of caution and awe. Finally, Lily signed, small but sure. Why do you talk with your hands? Mark breathed out slowly, letting truth guide him. My son Ethan can't hear, so this is how we talk. He waited, giving them time. Hazel's expression shifted, an almost smile, fragile, but real. Talking with hands is easier. People don't get mad. Something sharp twisted deep in Mark's chest. He didn't ask what had been done to them. He already understood too much. You never have to use your mouth with me, he signed. Your hands say everything just fine. The words settled softly over the room, reshaping the air itself. In that moment, he understood, with startling clarity, silence was not their prison. It was their refuge. And tonight, for the first time, they had invited him in. Rain swept over Seattle that week, turning the city to silver. Inside the child care center, Lily and Hazel sat straighter than ever, their wooden carvings arranged neatly beside them. They weren't hiding. They were waiting. And Mark Turner didn't enter alone. Ethan stepped in beside his father, small and quiet, his navy jacket swallowed by the dim light. The twins stiffened at the sight of a new child. A disruption in the pattern. Their fingers tightened around their carvings. Mark knelt calmly. This is my son, Ethan. He's 8. Ethan didn't move closer. Instead, he raised his hands with the gentleness of someone who understood fear. Hi, I'm Ethan. Lily hesitated. Hazel swallowed. Then Lily lifted her hands barely above her lap. We're 7, Hazel followed. I'm Hazel. This is Lily. A flicker of connection broke through the room's tension. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out his own wooden fish. When I'm scared, he signed, I hold this. Hazel's breath trembled. She looked down at her fish, the one Mark had given her on the first day, lifted it carefully, and signed me too. Lily nodded, clutching hers as though she'd been waiting for someone to understand. That was all it took. In a few minutes, 3 children sat closer than any adult had managed to bring them. Their hands moved in halting shapes, awkward but earnest. Ethan asked about the butterfly carving. Hazel signed that she loved the moon best. Lily said it helped her sleep. Silent laughter followed shoulders-shaking eyes, bright, a wordless joy. And Mark felt something shift. Not in the room, but in the air between 3 children who had all been shattered in different ways. He had brought Ethan to help the twins, but as he watched them sign to each other, sharing their quiet, their fears, their small wooden treasures, he saw the truth with startling clarity. They weren't being helped. They were finding each other. The day Olivia Mercer discovered everything began like any other, a meeting running too long, a dozen executives circling the same problem. Her mind calculating solutions with the precision of someone who had survived too many years at the top. By the time she left the conference room, the sky outside the glass tower had deepened into evening blue, and frustration pulsed behind her eyes. Another nanny had quit that morning. Another report of her daughters refusing to engage. Another reminder that 12 months had passed since Lily and Hazel had spoken a single word. The silence at home had grown so heavy, she sometimes felt like she was living underwater. She pushed open the child care center door, expecting to see her daughters curled in their usual corner, clutching their knees unreachable. She expected quiet distance, blankness. What she found hit her like a physical blow. The twins were sitting in a loose circle with Mark Turner and a small boy she didn't recognize. All three children's hands moved in a gentle storm of signs, fluid, bright alive. Lily's eyes sparkled. Hazel's shoulders were relaxed. And the boy was smiling, silent but radiant, as if he'd found something precious. For a moment, Olivia couldn't breathe. The twins noticed her first. Their hands paused mid-air. Their bodies stiffened, fear flickering across their features, but they didn't retreat to the corner. They stayed where they were, next to the janitor's son, close enough for trust to show itself plainly. Mark stood quickly, respectful, yet composed, his face calm, in a way that disarmed her. "Miss Mercer," he began quietly, "I was just." But Olivia wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her daughter's hands, still hovering near their chests, hovering in the shapes of words she had waited a year to hear. "They're signing," she whispered, the syllables breaking. "They're really signing." Mark nodded. "They've been communicating. For weeks, weeks." She had walked this hallway every day, blind, rushed, lost inside her own desperation to fix them. The realization struck deep. Lily signed something small, hesitant. "He's nice. He doesn't make us talk. He gives us things to hold." Her little hands lifted the wooden fish, smooth from constant touch. Olivia's knees nearly buckled. She raised her trembling hands and signed back, hoping she remembered the shapes correctly. "I'm so glad, sweetheart." Both girls froze, stunned. They hadn't known she could understand them. Olivia had been practicing in secret late at night, desperate for any way back to them. And now, here they were watching their mother speak their language for the first time. Hazel blinked fast, then touched Lily's hand with a tiny gesture that looked like relief. "Mr. Turner," Olivia said, voice thick, "would you continue spending time with them? Please. You've done more in 5 weeks than anyone else in a year. I'll compensate you, of course." "No," Mark said gently but firmly. "I'm not doing this for money. I'll help them because they deserve someone who listens." Olivia's throat tightened. She had seen powerful men. She was one of the powerful ones herself. But this quiet janitor had done something extraordinary. Not through authority, through gentleness. Why, she whispered. She needed the truth, needed to understand what made this stranger so different. Mark looked at his son, then back at her. "Because I know what fear looks like," he said softly. "And I know what it feels like when someone finally sees you." The words hit her like a confession from a man who had carried more pain than he let show. His posture was humble, his uniform simple, yet there was a gravity to him, a quiet strength disguised as a caretaker with a mop and a cart. For the first time, Olivia realized the truth. She had misjudged him. This was not a janitor who happened to be kind. This was a man who knew how to pull broken children back from the edge because he had once done it for his own. In that moment, standing in the doorway, with tears threatening to spill, Olivia understood something else, too. Something that struck deep and irrevocable. She hadn't just walked in on a miracle. She had walked in on the beginning of a family she never saw coming. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm Olivia Mercer had never imagined her home or her life could have again. Each evening, Lily and Hazel waited by the childcare window, their wooden carvings arranged in gentle patterns, their eyes brightening the moment Mark and Ethan stepped inside. The transformation was subtle at first, then undeniable. The twins no longer hid behind silence. They reached toward connection, not away from it. Olivia watched from the doorway in those early days, unsure how to enter a world made of quiet hands and unspoken understanding. The three children signed to each other with eagerness, Ethan describing his favorite book, Hazel teasing him about the crooked tail on his wooden fish. Lily recreating the story Mark had told them about the moon, watching scared children at night. Their silent laughter filled the room more completely than any sound. Gradually, Olivia took a seat on the carpet with them. She signed slowly, clumsily, drawing soft smiles from her daughters and patient corrections from Ethan. Every session became its own kind of homecoming. Lily leaning against Hazel leaning toward Ethan glancing up at Mark with a quiet pride, and Olivia learning to speak with her hands and not her fear. Outside those evenings, their lives intertwined, almost without conscious intent. Mark and Olivia began sharing coffee after work at a small cafe near Pike Place Market, where the chatter of strangers created a cocoon they didn't need to fill with anything heavy. Sometimes they talked about the children, sometimes about their work, sometimes about nothing important at all. Little by little, their stories deepened. In one of those quiet corners, Mark told her about Claire, the accident, and the guilt the 6 months when Ethan vanished into himself. Olivia listened with something like reverence hearing in his voice, not just pain, but the quiet endurance of a man who had learned to rebuild from ashes. She told him about her own fear, how a year of watching her daughters disappear had hollowed her from the inside. He didn't offer advice, he simply understood. And that, she realized, was an intimacy she had forgotten existed. On weekends, the two families found themselves moving like a single unit. At Green Lake Park, the children raced across the grass, Ethan always glancing back to make sure Lily and Hazel kept up. At a Fremont art class, the twins painted swirling colors, while Ethan built bold shapes, and Mark teased Olivia when her landscape leaned dramatically to one side. She flicked paint at him in mock outrage, laughing harder than she had in years. It felt ridiculous. It felt real. One night, long after the children had fallen asleep on their mats, Mark and Olivia stayed by the tall windows, Seattle glowing beneath them like a restless sea. Rain streaked the glass. The room felt unbearably still. "I don't know how to thank you," Olivia whispered. "You brought them back to me." Mark shook his head. They weren't gone. They were waiting for someone who listened. Olivia looked at him, seeing not the janitor the world dismissed, but a man who carried strength the way others carried armor. "You've changed our lives," she said softly. His answer was quiet, steady, and impossibly sincere. "You've changed mine too." For a long moment, neither moved. But the air between them shifted, warm, certain, inevitable. They were two people who had learned to survive heartbreak. Now, without rushing, they were learning how to heal side by side. Healing, Olivia realized, wasn't something they endured alone anymore. It had become something they shared. Spring arrived softly in Seattle, the kind that washed the city in pale sunlight and made even the tallest buildings seem gentler. By then, Lily, Hazel, Ethan, Mark, and Olivia had become something no one had planned, but everyone felt an almost family shaped by carved wood quiet hands and the slow return of trust. On a chilly Saturday morning, Mark led them back to the small garden near Volunteer Park, the place where Hazel had spoken her first accidental word after a year of silence. The air smelled of damp earth and new blossoms. Lily collected acorns near a mossy bench. Hazel stacked smooth stones into a careful tower. Ethan pointed excitedly to a chickadee hopping between branches, signing the word bird with bright enthusiasm. Olivia watched from a few steps away, her heart full to the brim. The girls were speaking more now, not constantly, not loudly, but naturally. A mix of sign and soft words chosen freely rather than forced. Their laughter came easily. Their eyes no longer carried the weight of old fear. Mark stood nearby with a small wooden box tucked under his arm, nervous in a way Olivia had rarely seen. His breath clouded in the cool air as he finally called the children over. Ethan took his position first, then Lily and Hazel flanked him, with a seriousness that made Olivia's pulse thrum. They each held a hand-painted sign, the colors bright against the gray stone path. When they turned the signs toward her, Olivia's breath vanished. "Will you marry us?" 3 small sets of hands lifted the message she never expected, never dared imagine, each child looking at her with a mixture of hope and certainty. And in front of them, Mark knelt in the grass, opening the wooden box to reveal a hand-carved sculpture of 5 figures linked at the hands. A family smooth and warm-shaped, from the same maple that had comforted her daughters through their darkest days. "Olivia Mark," said, voice unsteady like a man, holding both fear and joy in the same breath, "if you'll have us, I'd like us to be a real family." For one long, trembling moment, Olivia couldn't speak. Tears gathered, broke, and ran freely down her cheeks. Lily reached out first, touching her mother's arm. Hazel followed, resting her head against Olivia's side, as if anchoring her answer. Ethan watched with wide, hopeful eyes. Olivia laughed through her tears, nodded hard, and pulled them all toward her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of you." The children collided into her in a tangle of arms. Mark rose, slipping his arms around them, all his forehead resting gently against hers. For the first time in years, Olivia felt completely held, not as a CEO or a woman trying to stay strong, but as someone finally allowed to be loved. 6 months later, under a canopy of autumn flowers in that same garden, they exchanged vows. Lily and Hazel wore matching flower crowns and spoke their promises in both sign and soft words. Ethan signed Mark's vows as his father voiced them, his hands steady proud. When rings were placed, all 3 children rushed forward, laughing, shouting, signing life bursting around them like a chorus. That evening in their new shared home, the sound of a piano drifted from the living room. Lily and Hazel played a simple duet they had practiced for weeks, their voices threading gently above the keys. Ethan sat beside them, one hand on the wood, to feel the vibrations, the other signing fragments of the lyrics he imagined. The music wasn't perfect, but it was whole. Mark and Olivia stood by the window, arms wrapped around each other, watching their children, each one once broken, now blooming. "We built something beautiful," Olivia murmured. Mark pressed a kiss to her hair. "From pieces that weren't lost," he said softly, "just waiting." On the mantel sat the carving of 5 figures holding hands. Beside it rested the first small fish, worn smooth by fear and hope, and tiny trembling fingers. A reminder of how everything had started. A reminder that healing sometimes begins with something small enough to fit in a child's palm and grows into something strong enough to hold a family together forever. In the end, what Mark, Olivia, and their children discovered reflects a truth any trauma specialist would affirm. Healing rarely begins with grand interventions. It begins with presence, with safety, with the smallest gestures offered consistently over time. A carved fish, a shared silence, a patient hand signing, "I'm here." When children feel seen rather than fix, their voices, spoken or signed, find their way back on their own terms. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder that gentleness is powerful, and quiet understanding can rebuild what fear once fractured. And if you'd like more stories that illuminate how love transforms the unseen, you can support this channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who may need them. Before you go, share your thoughts below with a short phrase: choose gentleness.